Please continue to enjoy your lunch. But let's get started. Again, my name is Bradley Peterson. A couple of housekeeping type items. Oh, got to turn the thing on first. Step one. I'd like to thank our presenting sponsors, folks that'll be here tomorrow as well. So the Aggregate and Ready Mix Association of Minnesota, Bowleg Inc., Fulton Bank, Charter Communications, Flaherty and Hood, Frontier Energy, Liuna of Minnesota and North Dakota, Widseth, and then also Xcel Energy. So special thanks to those folks. We appreciate their support. It really does help defray the costs of the conference and some of the activities. So, quick word on connecting to Wi-Fi. If you are looking to connect and you'll want to have connectivity because we're going to be doing some interactive things that requires you to get out your phone or other device, select the St. James Hotel Wi-Fi network. No password is necessary. And then when prompted, click the blue continue to the internet, and then the Chinese will have all of your data. So, it's very, very easy steps. Very easy steps. So, that's a word on that. So, one of the things that we like to do is get a little interactive feedback from folks. And so the last couple of times if you've been with us, we still call it clicker questions, but they're all on your phone. So if you get your device out and enter vvox.app into the web browser, and I'm going to do this right with you. Also, the instructions for this are on your in your packet. If I can remember how. Oh, it's right there. So you get vvox.app. CGMC Summer Conference 2022 is what it should say. Oh no, I'm sorry. First you enter your ID. Hold on. Gotta go slow for Kevin.
We're down in a dungeon. Yeah, put some tinfoil on the head.
Get
better reception and put your left leg.
no spaces. Thank you.
All right. How are we doing? Everybody in the back good?
Some of us are challenged. Thank you.
All right. Again, the instructions are in your packet if you fall behind. So you'll see this screen, CGMC Summer Conference 2022. And when I ask a polling question, it'll start when I click through it. You can change your answer anytime until the poll closes. And then magically, the responses will end up here on the screen. So let's see what we got here. So, a few things about the city of Red Wing, just to kind of get us ready here. So, the first North American record for this activity was recorded in Red Wing in 1887. Was it? Long distance ice skating, ski jumping, holding your breath underwater, most Canadian geese shot in one day, or the largest muskie. That one is just for Marshall.
You just wait. Just wait, and they'll close it and it'll...
All right. Everybody ready? Here we go. We are closed. We're tabulating. You are a smart crowd. It is indeed ski jumping. The record was 37 feet. And apparently Red Wing has quite a ski jumping history and tradition with the Aurora Ski Club. You can learn a lot on Wikipedia, by the way, about Red Wing. And so that is indeed the correct answer. Good job. So we've got one more here that's at least Red Wing related. The predecessor of this Minnesota higher education institution was founded in Red Wing by Eric Aurelius in 1862. Was it the University of Minnesota, Luther Seminary, Concordia College Moorhead, Augsburg University, or Gustavus Adolphus? All right, I think we're pretty close there. Let's close things up. Let's see what the answer is. Or let's see what you think is the answer. Again, most of you, or plurality at least, are correct. It is indeed Gustavus Adolphus. Interestingly, actually also Hamlin was started in Red Wing as well. They had to shut down because of the Civil War and everybody going off to fight, and then it was restarted in St. Paul. But Gustavus Adolphus started in Red Wing, was here for a year or two, then moved to East Union as St. Ansgar's Academy, and then finally in the early 1870s went to St. Peter and became Gustavus Adolphus. St. Peter, apparently, those sneaky folks offered the college a whole bunch of land and $10,000 to come to town. So that's how Gustavus ended up in St. Peter.
Brad,
Yes.
can I add that there's a ski jump museum in the St. James
Oh.
on the mezzanine. So it's that little half floor right above the registration table. It's a little ski jump museum that's open over there.
All right, there is, I'm told, in the building here, a ski jump museum upstairs, third level,
It's a mezzanine.
mezzanine level. So, for you ski jump historians, that's going to be your pilgrimage. So, keep your device around for future polling questions. So, I struggled a little bit as trying to figure out what to talk about as a result of the legislative session, right? We talk about what is the, what is kind of the hallmark of the session or the theme of the session. This year was a little bit challenging because the failure was really the overwhelming theme and result. And so we know that the 2022 session was a giant failure. They didn't pass a bonding bill. They had a tax bill all teed up with local government aid of $30 million ready to go, a whole bunch of other things ready to go. They could have passed these things, and they did not. So the question is not to talk about their failure, but why? Why did they just not get anything done? Why is it difficult generally for the legislature to get things done? And then a little bit about maybe what we can do about it. Because I will say, as I was putting this together and doing some research and some thinking, I'm thinking to myself, holy cow, these people are just going to all want to drown themselves in the river. This is not an uplifting topic. But we'll try to find some positive in it as well. So, more polling here. In one word, one or two words, reaction, what was your reaction to the legislative session? Now, I will pre-warn all of you that VVOX will not accept certain words. So if those are your thoughts, your answer will not be recorded. We found this out in the office. Now you all are trying to be creative with pound signs and ampersands. All right, we're going to give it a couple more moments here. All right, well, we're logging. All right. Oh, they're still coming in. Here we go. Let's see.
There we go. Drum roll.
All right. We've got largest here: disappointing, failure, disappointed, disappointment, frustrating, existential dread, total poop emoji, worthless, excessive pork, childish, disgusting, ennui, unmitigated disaster, not finished. All right. Yes, so there you see, and I think all of those are things that aptly describe the session, and at least certainly how we felt about it. So today's discussion, we're going to talk about the factors driving the inability to get anything done. We're going to talk about what can be done by city officials and the CGMC, and we're going to take a peek at upcoming elections and kind of just see a little bit about what might happen, could happen, etc. So, the main ingredients of failure, and I will preface all of this by saying this is my opinion. This is after watching the legislature and being around there, the conclusions that I personally have come to in terms of the legislature and how they operate. And I will admit that it may come off as a bit cynical, but I also do think, again, from my own personal belief, that there are some elements of truth here. You're free to take or agree with any of them that you think. So, the ingredients of failure, and we're going to talk about each one of these in turn. Divided government, other than the state of Virginia, we're the only legislature that is divided between Republicans and Democrats. All or nothing legislating, increased polarization just generally within our culture, clash of generations, fewer and fewer competitive elections, upside down incentives. And we're going to talk about primaries, and we're going to talk about performance versus problem solving. And then the fact that there is, frankly, at this point, almost no consequence for a legislator or the legislature for failing to get things done. So that is, I think, some of the main ingredients, and we'll talk about each one of them somewhat in turn here. So first we're going to talk about divided government. As I mentioned, Minnesota is one of 2 states that has divided government. And we've had this before, right? We've dealt with this almost throughout most of our history. Since 1976, when we had party control first, or party designation for legislators first on the ballot. They either ran as nonpartisan folks, but they split into conservative and liberal at the time. So starting in 1976, you had Republicans and you had Democrats. There have been only 11 years where the legislature has been entirely controlled by only one party, House, Senate, Governor. Now I will note too, if you are having a problem seeing some of these graphs and such, there is a packet, there is material in your packet that has some of these for you, so you can take a look at them and understand, see better what we're talking about. So, it's fairly common that we've had divided government, but I do think it is a problem, because then obviously you have to get folks to agree on things in order to get things done. And so not one party gets all of its way in this scenario. And obviously, naturally, for the last several years, we have had some form of divided government here in Minnesota. Let's test the extent of this clicker here. So, question, clicker question again. Would Minnesota be better off if we had a House, Senate, and Governor, all controlled by the GOP, a House, Senate, and Governor, all controlled by the DFL, or essentially what we have now, which is divided government? So, which scenario do you think that we would be better off with? And so, you can think of this either from the CGMC perspective, you can think about it from your personal politics. I'll talk about my perspective here in just a second. We'll see what folks think. And I'm going to get closer to the screen so I can actually see the results. All right, let's close her down, see what folks have to say. All right, so about 25% think we'd be better off with all GOP, about 35% better off if it were all DFL, and 40% saying that as imperfect as the status quo may be, it's probably the best outcome. I tend to agree that single party control, again, speaking from the CGMC perspective, that single party control is not good for CGMC and rural Minnesota. Each party has items of the CGMC agenda that they support more strongly than others, right? So in many cases, the Republicans are more with us when it comes to environmental regulatory issues, and the Democrats may be more with us when it comes to local government aid and some other investments and spending type things. Neither fully embraces our agenda, but they both support elements of it. On some issues, one party is clearly better than the other party for the CGMC, but neither party is a perfect fit for CGMC issues. And I think the thing that divided government actually does that helps us and is helpful generally is that it reins in the worst instincts on the far corners of both parties. When you have to compromise, you have to eventually tune out the far left and the far right and say, all right, here's what we need to do to get things done. If we are going to pass a budget, if the state is not going to shut down, if we can keep the parks open, we've got to get it together. And the common sense perspectives in both parties tend to prevail at that point, eventually. But it can be a struggle, which is why divided government is, I think, one of the elements of failure. But I think it, by and large, is probably still better than not in terms of CGMC. All or nothing legislating. And so what I mean by this, and I think this year is actually a very good example of it, right? There wasn't a state budget to do, but there was lots of money to spend. It was a bonding year, and so their main task should have been to do a bonding bill. They did a tax bill that included LGA, so they had elements of things that everybody said that they wanted to do, that everybody sort of had some level of agreement on. But what ends up happening, I think, more and more, is that all of these things become tied together. We can't do X unless we do Y, and then we have to do number 3, and we have to do number Z over here. And it all has to be done together, because they think that if they do something on this over here, then they have given up, one party or the other has given up leverage of some sort. And while that may be true to some extent, the outcome, as again we saw this year, can be absolute failure in getting anything done. And so when you put all of your eggs in one basket, it makes it very hard to get scrambled eggs and an omelet and egg sandwich. You just can't do it. It's all tied together. And I think it actually is a real problem, and I think it was one of the significant problems this year. Division and animosity between the political parties and in our culture, I think, in general. And so here's where actually I would encourage you to pull out, unless your eyes are really good, to pull out the packet, the graphs that we've taken. We've taken these from the Pew Research Center. Again, this is where I did want to throw myself off the top of our building reading some of these polls. But I do think that it is instructive, and I do think that we all have some sense of this anyways in our lives. So the Pew Research Center has done a lot of excellent work as it relates to public polling and public perceptions of politics. And so one of the things they did was looking at 17 industrialized countries and asked the same question. And so the question had to do with the percent who say there are very strong or strong conflicts between people who support different political parties. That's the first one. So the mean, or the median rather, for answers in these countries is right there. The US is way over here at 90%. So 90% of respondents in the United States said that there are very strong or strong conflicts between people in different political parties. That is a significant amount of intensity, especially when you compare it to other countries. I think the only other countries they said that even approached the US in that regard were France and South Korea. The second question, that people who answered that there are very strong or strong conflicts between people who live in cities and people who live in rural areas. Again, in the US, we were beyond the norm in terms of other countries. Not quite as significant as the answer in terms of conflict between political parties, but still nonetheless at 42%, so not insignificant. Percent, and this is still the same survey of 17 countries, who say when it comes to important issues facing their society, people may disagree over policies, but most people disagree over the basic facts. And again, here in the United States, we have a sense that we don't even agree on the basic facts of a situation, much less what the solutions could be to any given problem. Again, much more so than other industrialized countries. And so you see we are an outlier in terms of other countries like us, in terms of opinion, in terms of how we view each other, how we view these situations. Again, from another Pew Research poll, growing shares in both parties give cold ratings to those in opposing parties. And so here's what I think is interesting is you see over time this progression from March of 16 to September of 19. You see a much more negative feeling of folks in both parties as they view people in the opposite party. It is increasingly negative how we view each other based on our partisan breakdown. And again, Republicans and Democrats say they can't agree on basic facts, similar to the results from the other survey. So significant negativity based on just how you label yourself, and then also again, continued disagreement about basic facts. Most partisans view the other side as closed-minded. Republicans see Democrats as unpatriotic. So percent of Republicans, this is the first one, who say Democrats are blank. So closed-minded, 64%, unpatriotic, 63%, immoral, 22%, lazy, 46%, unintelligent, 36%. Flip side, Democrats, what they say about Republicans, 75% closed-minded, 47% immoral, 38% unintelligent, 23% unpatriotic, and 20% lazy. So this is how these partisans answered questions about people in the other party. I was frankly shocked by this. As much as I may personally disagree with a lot of people, and I talk to a lot of people that I disagree with, I don't know that I'd ever necessarily find these words to categorize my feelings about them. And I think most of you would probably agree. This is really, really concerning, I think. And again, this was I think, when I wanted to crawl under my desk. So, you take this negative feeling about the others, you take divided government, you take this idea of legislating kind of all or nothing, we have to solve every problem or we can't solve any problem, and then you combine it with how things work in our elections. And one of the things that we're seeing is the average margin of victory in legislative elections is increasing, meaning there is fewer competitive elections. I was actually surprised when we looked at this just how high it was to begin with in the early 2000s, the 23, 22%. I think a lot of that is attributable actually to the historically very lopsided elections that Minneapolis and St. Paul have had in favor of Democrats for some time. But then as you see, as time has progressed, both in the House on the left and the Senate on the right, the margin of victory in these legislative elections has become even greater, up to 30 and 40%. And so I think what is happening is that while Minneapolis and St. Paul historically have had these kind of blowout elections because they have had such strong party identification, we have fewer districts where you get a lot of competition. And so now more and more in rural Minnesota, you are seeing blowout elections for Republicans. Or even if you did have a case where maybe Republicans had always historically been winning those elections, now they're winning by much, much greater margins. And so if you don't have competitive elections, then you don't have a good free flow of discussion on the issues, you don't have new ideas being elucidated, and then once you get to the legislature, if you are the winner of one of these elections, you may feel fairly bulletproof in terms of your decision making. I can almost do whatever I want because I won by 30%, and I can pretty well count on, as long as I live in X town and have an R or a D behind my name, that I will continue to win by those margins. And so the incentives are upside down. I like this spinning thing. The method of selecting candidates requires that the candidates appeal to very small and increasingly radical extremes in both parties. Right? This is the caucus system. I'll tell the story of the first caucus that I went to. In St. Peter, as a student at Gustavus' office, it happened to be a Republican caucus. And went there with one of my friends from college who went on to get a PhD in history, and we sat at our table for our precinct. And we got to the time of giving resolutions, right? Where you're saying, this is what the party platform should be, this is what we should support. And there was a remarkably normal, middle-class, 35-ish age guy, clean haircut, horn-rimmed glasses, sitting across the table. And he said, well, I've got a few. Great, great. This is democracy at its purest. Let's talk about these issues. So his first one was that he wanted to do away with the 8th Amendment to the US Constitution, which is cruel and unusual punishment. Wanted to get away with one of the first 10 amendments to the Constitution, the Bill of Rights. Cruel and unusual punishment. Nope, these people are criminals, and we should put the screws to them. Okay, so we talked about that. I don't remember whether it became approved or not. Next one, same guy. The United States should annex Mexico. Now, this wasn't 1896, this was 1996. And I think that, again, and I've been to both Republican and Democrat caucuses, and it's you get that sort of thing at both of them, so I'm not just picking on the Republicans. These are the people who show up and select our candidates. And these are the choices then that we are given. And so if that is your ticket to being in the state legislature, especially if you know, if I make it past this hurdle and become the R or D endorsed candidate, and I'm going to win by 30%, of course you're going to talk to those people and say, oh yeah, Mexico. Well, I can get on board with that. And so I think a good case in point is Senator Pratt, who's a Republican from the southern suburbs. So Senator Pratt is a very thoughtful, conservative, but pragmatic, wants to solve problems, Main Street kind of legislator. He's the kind of person that I want in the legislature, because he thinks about issues. He was not endorsed by his local party unit, and so he's now running in a primary. And so you have this time and time and time again where we are losing good people because they are not making it through the early stages of these endorsements. And that's then where we're getting this trend towards more primaries and more primary challengers winning. And so a lot of folks have decided that, you know, my legislator, Republican or Democrat, is not liberal or conservative enough, even though they may be profoundly liberal or conservative, because they are already going through this process or have gone through this process and appealed to these people in the past. You're getting people on the left or right saying, I'm going to run against this person because they are not enough X. I have no idea in many of these cases how there is room on the bench to the right or to the left of some of these legislators who are being challenged, but nonetheless, they are. And this was a trend that has started really kind of, I think, in earnest here, 2016, and then in 2020, we saw a lot more. We had 18 total primaries against incumbents, with 2 new senators and 2 new House members prevailing out of that. And so, you know, as we look at some of these stats, we're looking at just ones where there was actually a real competition in redistricting years where it wasn't just 2 legislators of the same party who were put together. And so you see this trend in the Minnesota House of more and more primaries, and then more of them being successful in terms of the challenger. Likewise in the Senate side, more primaries and more challengers winning, which means then that the representation that we are getting in the legislature is even more polarized left and right, because the winner is bringing that perspective to the legislature if they were a challenger, and the incumbent feels like they have to play to that group in order to make it through their primary so that they can go on to the election and win by 25 or 30%. So the incentives here are not aligned in terms of our elections to have a lot of competition, a lot of debate, a lot of diversity of thought in our legislature. It is not that way, and I think I would argue it is getting much, much worse. If you are a certain type of Republican, you can't get through a primary. If you are a certain type of Democrat, you cannot get through a primary. Period. And I think then you get a lot of really thoughtful, moderate people self-selecting out of the process and saying, well, screw it, I'll just hang out with my family and run my business. And so the basic question is, does that contribute to the inability to sort of get things done? I think it does and it doesn't. I mean, we have been able to accomplish things while still using omnibus bills as a vehicle for efficiency to pass budgets, right? I think that the legislature does press it, although the courts, when it's been challenged, has given them pretty strong leeway. The legislature can keep saying, okay, this is really bad, guys. We see what you're doing here. We don't like it, but you can do it. But don't press us, or next time we'll say you can't do it. And then another court challenge comes on something that's even a little bit more expansive, and then the court says again, okay, we really mean it this time. You can't pass these bills like this. You do it one more time, and so on and so on and so forth. So I do think that it is a challenge. There has been some talk at the legislature about trying to do less of that thing, and legislators always talk about it, although I will believe it when I see it, because it really does obscure a lot of issues in terms of how things, come to be law. I mean, that's essentially how we got THC, right? I mean, it was...
It takes care of their accountability. If it's a single subject, not only you have to fess up to it, but if it's in a big omnibus bill, nobody...
Yeah, no, there's certainly more accountability if you are voting on things that are of more individual nature. Absolutely. I don't see it changing significantly, despite the fact that almost everybody says they want to change it. Other questions or comments about the divided nature of... yes, we're going to go down here to the neglected people in the lower mezzanine here. All right, here you go.
It's my understanding that our state lost a tremendous amount of infrastructure dollars as a result of the legislature not passing the budget. Like $100 million was lost of federal funding because our state didn't have a budget that was passed just so that we had the match. And so it's my understanding also that there was a significant amount of wastewater infrastructure dollars, and then broadband or IT security, cybersecurity related money as well. And so I was wondering, has the coalition or any of the other groups that represent the cities, have they looked to pull together any information about how is it that we hold our legislators more accountable to all the money that because they didn't do their job, that we're losing out on, that comes down to the local level?
Yeah, no, that's exactly one of the consequences of the inaction this year, is that whether it is wastewater, broadband, IT, transportation is actually, I think, the biggest one in which we've really lost out on federal funds. That is absolutely right. In terms of holding them accountable, at the end of session, there were people screaming from the rooftops, like you're missing an opportunity here. Here's everything that we're going to last out. The construction unions were absolutely screaming bloody murder about this, and nothing. So I think there may be some opportunity here, in the next legislative session to perhaps make up for that a little bit. I'm not exactly sure how all of these, and they all work a little bit differently, all of these different pots of federal money. But it has been one of the significant impacts of the non-action this legislature. I think there was another question down here that I wanted to get to, and then I will return topside. Was it you? Oh, you were being helpful. Okay, got it. Very good. Looking out for each other. All right, we got one up here. And then we'll move on here. Does somebody know what time it is?
It's 9.
As greater Minnesota cities, why can't we for the accountability side, why aren't we talking about term limits? If we get stallmates that have been there forever, and sure they may have a go-to on one thing, why aren't we getting fresh ideas, voices of the actual people, instead of someone who's been there for 30 years?
So I'm going to take a risk here and ask a question. Because I don't know the answer of what the mood in the room would be about term limits. Who here would support term limits on legislators? Let's say 8, there you go. All right, and who here would not support term limits on legislators? So I think as a group we're pretty divided. And I can see arguments on both sides. And so I think, step one is you're going to have to go out and convince a fair number of your colleagues that that's the way to go. But it is, it's a good question, and it's a valid question, and I do think that there's answers on both sides and perspectives on both sides. So let's talk a little bit about the elections, hopefully in about 10 minutes or so, which I think we can do if I remember all of these slides correctly. Where did I do with my clicker? There it is. Okay, good. Thought I left it up here. All right. So, what do you think will happen this November? So get your device out. You may have to re-log in. Do you think, one, that we'll have the status quo, a GOP Senate and a DFL House? Two, conventional wisdom is that GOP sweeps Senate and House. Three, something weird, control of each body flips, so the Senate goes DFL and the House GOP. Or, the long shot, you have a DFL Senate and a DFL House. All right, let's see what we've got here. All right, pretty close between the status quo and the conventional wisdom of a GOP sweep. I think those are also probably the two most likely outcomes. I can see actually a scenario for number three, where we end up with divided government, but just with the parties flipped. Number four is just not going to happen. And so, yeah, okay, very interesting. Who wins governor this November, Tim Walz or Scott Jensen? If you're a big marijuana candidate person, I don't think you're going to win. Just going to be honest. All right, let's see what we got here. Pretty strong majority thinking that Tim Walz is going to prevail, with 20% saying Scott Jensen. Interesting. All right, very good. So obviously there's a lot of dynamics in play, and we're pretty familiar with all of these. Highest inflation in decades, Supreme Court abortion decision, public safety issues, and I think that cuts both ways for the parties. Guns, midterms being historically bad for the president's party, especially if they're unpopular, and just the growing nationalization of our electoral conversations. That more and more, just whatever the prevailing national mood is, whatever happens in Congress is filtering down to the local level. So just how unpopular is Joe Biden? Well, this is a sort of poll of polls taken from 538. So they do this tracking and weighting based on the credibility of the poll and the recency of it all and all sorts of statistical things that Anya can explain to you. But the basic outcome here is that in terms of disapproval of Joe Biden, it's at 57% if you kind of put all of those things together. So pretty significant, and really I think one of the highest disapproval numbers for a president at this point in their presidency. So pretty significant. There was a crossover period here in August of 21, it looks like, or August of 20. So yeah, it's I think this is not news, but it is, I think, striking just how unpopular Joe Biden seems to be. So Walz versus Jensen in the MinPost poll in June showed essentially a dead heat, with 42% favoring Tim Walz and 40% favoring Scott Jensen. So this is really, I think, just kind of the base level where the parties are at, right? We are essentially, I think, kind of a 40-40 state plus, 20% kind of in the middle, sloshing around. History would suggest that Walz does have an advantage. The DFL has swept statewide offices since 2011. Dayton wins in 2010 and 2014, despite tough years for Democrats generally. A significant advantage for the DFL in the heavy, more populated metro area. that gets back to those districts, where the legislative candidates win by 40% or whatever it is. So, I think there is suggestion that Walls does have an advantage. I don't think that my personal belief, again, is that if Walls does win, it's going to be by a narrower margin, a much narrower margin than he did in 2018. Jensen will benefit from likely a strong GOP year generally, that's the atmospherics. Has made statements on vaccines that are out of touch with the mainstream. I think, again, whatever you think about vaccines, if you look at the fact that 60 to 63% of Minnesotans, when polled, say they generally support those things, I think that it does suggest something. And I think, unfortunately for Jensen, this is kind of the way he is most known to many people, and has not yet had the opportunity to kind of go out and talk about the rest of what he brings to the table. Our CGMC board met with a bunch of candidates for governor this spring. I was actually very impressed with Jensen, hearing him speak, and nothing he was saying had anything to do with vaccines or COVID and that kind of thing. And so I think that the extent to which he's not talking about that will certainly benefit him. And he's generally running on the idea that Walls is an ineffective leader. And I think there are, it's been a tough year for any elected leader, as you all know. And so it's tough to show results. It's tough to show what you've accomplished when you've been dealing with COVID and all of these other things that are going on. And so we will see as things go how this all plays out. But I think those are sort of the general dynamics at play in that election. Race for the legislature, as I said, the conventional wisdom is that the GOP will capture the House and the Senate. What we do know is that in wave years, we tend to see greater swings in the House, which would favor the GOP. House GOP is very confident of your chances. Boy, talk to Kurt Doubt and you've got to look way up here because the guy feels like he's 10 feet tall, talking about the Republicans' chances of winning the House. They are very, very confident. More closely divided Senate will be more of a fight, and I think it does largely depend in some cases who wins these primaries. There's going to be a couple of elections where if certain, both again House or DFL and Republican, where if one candidate versus the other wins, that may favor the other party. Now there's not a lot of those, but there are a couple where that other candidate is so far out of the mainstream, it may actually go to the benefit of the other party. And again, we've got very, very narrow majorities or narrow margins in the Senate. So whoever does win a majority in the Senate, it will be very, very narrow. The one thing that we do know is that the Senate GOP caucus will be more conservative than it is now. Whether they're in the majority or in the minority, there are 4 or 5 members of the Minnesota House who are very conservative, who are running for the Senate, again in these districts where they will be the senator because of the nature of things. And so I do think that whatever happens, we can be pretty sure that the Senate GOP caucus will be more conservative than it is now. So looking forward, 2023 will present lots of opportunities to educate legislators on our issues. As I mentioned, we know that there's going to be a minimum of 47 new legislators next year, and so that we've got a lot to do. And we're going to be talking about that a little bit here throughout the conference. We'll be talking about this much more at our fall conference in Alexandria. But there is a lot of work to do, and the extent to which we are successful, it will be requiring strong engagement from all of our members and all of our member cities. That's how we've been successful in the past, and that's how we will continue to be successful here in the future. Again, no matter what the makeup of the legislature, no matter who the governor is, we've worked in just about every scenario and been able to get things done. So I don't believe it is all doom and gloom, but I do believe that our task is maybe tougher than it has been in years past, and that next year especially, because of all the new faces, is going to present a pretty significant challenge. Any other questions? Probably got maybe 2 minutes, and then we'll take a little bit of a break and get ready for our next thing, which actually I think is going to be pretty interesting. Yes, Kevin Riney from the city of Owatonna, the I don't have anything pithy to say.
Randy, do you have an opinion which would Governor Walz or Johnson best representative for Greater Minnesota?
So the question is, would Walls or Jensen be better for Greater Minnesota? I am going to say a lot of words and not answer your question. I think we know Walls is a known quantity, right? We know what Walls is about. Whether you like it or not, we know what Walls is about. The thing that concerns me about Jensen is that we don't know a lot about what his beliefs and thoughts are on issues. He has not, like I said earlier, had an opportunity to really define himself. He has not really had an opportunity to weigh in on issues of infrastructure, or local government aid, or property taxes, economic development for our communities, childcare, housing. We just don't know. And so, that I think is the dynamic. And whoever it is, we're going to have to work with them, right? But I know who I'm voting for, but I don't know if that person's better or not for Greater Minnesota. We're going to go back to the gentleman in the green shirt, not you.
So when I look at some of the information especially when you're showing how the different parties have some things that are great for our organization and some things that maybe they're not carrying, when I see in general the reddening of Greater Minnesota and then the bluing of the metro, where no longer is it, you have pockets of purple, I guess it just concerns me long term. And so what should we be looking at as an organization to make sure that if it's constantly a fight over the suburbs, that we don't just kind of get left behind because our areas are assumed to be one party?
Yeah, no, that's a good question, and one that I've thought quite a bit about, because it is a challenge. I do think we are better off generally if we have that kind of patchwork that you talk about. And 15 years ago, that's what we had. We had Democrats, who were longtime legislators in areas that now are in that 25-30% voting, margin of voting red. And so, I think it is a continual process of engagement and education with your legislator, because I think at an individual level, I think most legislators want to be and are generally supportive of their communities, with some variation, right, at an individual level. But once they get to that group dynamic of the caucus, it becomes all about the team. And that's where then you get, if you're a Republican, you've got Republicans from rural Minnesota and the suburbs. You've got Democrats, a handful still from real rural Minnesota versus some of the other larger regional centers, and then just all metro. And so I think it gets to that issue of continuing to work across parties, continuing to work with whoever's there, continuing to educate. But it is a tough challenge, and you identify a good tough challenge, and not one that I necessarily have really come to a conclusion about, especially if we end up in a scenario where Democrats have a firm control of the legislature. That I think makes it much harder for rural Minnesota generally, just based on where things are going. And that's where, at the very least, my belief has been we've had a backstop in Governor Walz. Even though he might not be with us on everything, he will be, maybe more with us than the average metro legislator might be. But under a different set of dynamics, I'm not sure how that works. So I don't have a great answer to your question. So unlike his, where I just didn't answer the question, on yours I just don't really have a great answer. All right, well, we are going to take a very brief break. The next thing that we have going, I think this is going to be tremendously interesting. We're going to talk about a very important topic for our cities.